My father stared at the personal check written out for $3 million. He let out a booming laugh that echoed off the vaulted ceilings of his McDonald Highlands dining room. He did not say thank you to his own mother. He tore the paper directly down the middle and dropped the pieces into a silver bowl of brown turkey gravy. He told the entire table her dementia was worsening and called the gift a pathetic fake. Before I tell you how I used a surviving piece of paper to dismantle a massive real estate fraud operation, welcome to Maya Tells Stories. Tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments, because I need to know if anyone else has survived this specific brand of family arrogance. My name is Montana. I am 32 years old, and I work as a forensic casino auditor. I spend my nights tracking missing chips and phantom accounting ledgers across the Las Vegas Strip. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, watching the torn pieces of my grandmother's check sink into the gravy boat. The Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to showcase my parents' recent real estate success. My father, Richard, bought the sprawling Nevada estate at the peak of the housing boom. He wore a crisp linen polo shirt and a heavy gold watch. He needed everyone in the room to calculate exactly how much his presents cost. My grandmother, Beatrice, sat quietly near the window wearing a simple beige cardigan. She had not spoken during the meal. When the catering staff cleared the silver plates, she reached into her woven handbag. She slid a crisp white envelope across the polished wood toward Richard. She slid another envelope toward my older brother Lance and pushed a final envelope toward me. Inside each envelope rested a personal bank check. The amount written in crisp black ink was exactly $3 million. Richard did not hesitate to humiliate her. After he ruined his check, my brother Lance eagerly followed his lead. Lance wore a tailored desert sage suit. He smirked while ripping his own envelope in half and tossing the pieces onto his dirty plate. He joked that the nursing home staff must have left the television on a financial channel for too long. I did not laugh. I looked at the fragile woman sitting at the end of the table. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes tracked every single movement in the room. I picked up my white envelope, I folded my check neatly in half, and slid it into the inner pocket of my blazer. I finished my glass of water, stood up, and left the estate before the staff served dessert. The next morning, I drove to a quiet suburban bank branch in Henderson. The lobby was empty, except for a few retirees cashing their pension checks. I walked up to the teller window and handed my folded paper to a young man behind the glass. He typed the routing sequence into his terminal. He paused. He typed the numbers a second time. The teller did not hand the check back to me. He picked up his desk phone and dialed an internal extension. Less than 60 seconds later, the heavy wooden door of the branch manager's office swung open. The manager was a man in his late 50s, wearing a conservative gray suit. He walked briskly toward the teller station. He looked at the computer monitor, and then he looked directly at me. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale white. He did not ask for my identification. He did not offer a polite corporate greeting. He reached over the counter, grabbed the physical check, and gestured for me to follow him. He ushered me inside his office and shut the door. He turned the deadbolt, locking us inside. The air conditioning unit hummed a low, tense note. He leaned across his desk, gripping the $3 million check like it was a live explosive. He looked at me with genuine terror in his eyes. He lowered his voice to a harsh whisper and told me we needed to talk right now. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, locking us inside the office. The branch manager stood behind his polished mahogany desk. He did not sit down. He did not offer me a seat. He gripped the edge of his computer monitor and physically turned the large screen toward me. I'm a forensic casino auditor. I spend my professional life staring at complex spreadsheets. I hunt for missing casino chips and phantom ledgers hidden deep within the Las Vegas Strip. I know exactly how to read a financial document. The screen displayed a high-tier corporate holding account. The name at the top of the secure portal belonged to my grandmother, Beatrice. The available balance listed in crisp green numbers did not reflect the meager savings of a woman rotting away in a suburban assisted living facility. The account held just over $40 million. I stopped breathing. $40 million. My mind scrambled to process the visual data. Beatrice lived on a fixed income, or so my father Richard always claimed. He complained constantly about the crushing financial burden of her medical care. He used her supposed poverty as a shield to justify his own real estate greed. He played the role of the burdened son, sacrificing his own comfort to keep his mother safe. The numbers on the screen dismantled his entire narrative in a single second. The $3 million check resting on the desk was not a product of dementia. It was entirely real. It was backed by a mountain of liquid capital. The branch manager pointed a trembling finger at the routing sequence printed along the bottom edge of the physical check. He explained that this was not a standard personal bank draft. The sequence contained a highly specific legal routing code. He cleared his throat and translated the dense banking jargon. The code was tied directly to an irrevocable blind trust established in the state of Nevada. By writing my name on the payee line and handing me the document, Beatrice executed a covert legal maneuver. The check was designed to officially designate me as the primary executor of her entire estate. Cashing that check was not a simple financial transaction. The manager warned me about the immediate, catastrophic consequences. If he processed the paper through the automated clearinghouse, it would trigger a massive federal freeze. Modern banking protocols implemented after 2016 flag any sudden executive transfers involving high net worth elderly clients. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network would lock the $40 million instantly. The transaction would automatically alert the Nevada probate courts. Every single asset belonging to my family would be frozen pending a grueling state investigation. The funds would be trapped in a legal purgatory for years. I stared at the glowing green numbers. My grandmother was executing a brilliant tactical strike. She knew I audited corrupt gambling operations for a living. She knew I possessed the exact analytical temperament required to handle a brutal financial war. She bypassed my father and my brother entirely. She bypassed the arrogant men who spent their lives mocking her quiet demeanor. She handed me the keys to a desert empire right at the Thanksgiving dinner table. But she also handed me a ticking bomb. The manager reached for his mouse. He minimized the primary holding account and opened a secondary security dashboard. A harsh red banner flashed across the top of the monitor. The system displayed a severe security breach warning. The manager kept his voice incredibly low. He explained that the bank's fraud department had been monitoring a relentless series of cyber attacks targeting Beatrice's portfolio. Someone was aggressively attempting to breach her financial firewalls. The attacks were sophisticated and persistent. They were not coming from overseas hackers or anonymous digital syndicates. He pulled up the digital footprint log. The system traced the intrusive login attempts to a specific Internet protocol address. I recognized the numerical sequence immediately. It was the exact static IP address assigned to my father's commercial real estate development firm in downtown Las Vegas. Richard was not a wealthy developer thriving in the post-pandemic housing boom. He was a desperate predator attempting to digitally pick the lock on his own mother's bank account. He had been trying to drain her assets for 6 straight months. The Thanksgiving dinner replayed in my mind with terrifying clarity. Richard did not tear up that $3 million check because he thought it was fake. He tore it up because he knew exactly what it was. He recognized the institutional watermark. He saw the trust routing numbers. He knew that if Lance or I successfully deposited those funds, the resulting federal freeze would lock him out of the accounts forever. His booming laugh was not born of arrogance. It was born of pure, unadulterated panic. He destroyed his own mother's gift to prevent us from accidentally detonating the legal trap she set for him. The narrative shifted violently. This was no longer a story about a narcissistic father showing off his wealth in a McDonald Highlands mansion. This was a calculated case of severe elder financial abuse. The statistics I read in corporate compliance briefings suddenly became my own grim reality. Families in America steal billions of dollars from their aging parents every single year. Richard was trying to join those statistics. He was actively plotting to strip Beatrice of her life savings to fund his failing luxury condominium projects. He was using her fabricated dementia as a smokescreen to cover his criminal tracks. I looked back at the manager. He asked me what I wanted to do with the physical check. I reached across the mahogany desk and picked up the piece of paper. I folded it carefully and placed it back inside my blazer pocket. I told him to keep the accounts secure and to file a formal suspicious activity report regarding the login attempts from my father's firm. I instructed him to deny any transfer requests unless I authorized them in person. The manager nodded, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He understood the gravity of the situation. He was no longer just a suburban bank employee. He was a witness to an impending corporate bloodbath. I walked out of the locked office and exited the bank. The bright Nevada sun blinded me for a second. The dry desert heat hit my face, acting as a sharp physical reset. I unlocked my car and sat in the driver's seat. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel. I needed to see Beatrice. I needed to know exactly how much danger she was facing. My parents forced her into a high-security assisted living facility located deep inside Summerlin. They claimed it was for her own safety. I now realized it was a luxury prison designed to keep her isolated while they tried to steal her fortune. I drove onto the 215 Beltway, heading west toward the master-planned communities of Summerlin. The highway cut through the barren Mojave landscape, bridging the gap between the chaotic casino sector and the affluent residential neighborhoods. I ran through the financial variables in my head. If Richard was willing to hack a federal banking portal, he was likely executing other illegal maneuvers behind closed doors. He managed my grandmother's medical care. He controlled her physical access to the outside world. He dictated which doctors she saw and which medications she received. The $12,000 a month facility was a fortress, but he held the master key. Every mile I drove increased the urgency pulsing through my veins. The illusion of a wealthy, harmonious family shattered, leaving behind a grim crime scene. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator. I had to reach her suite before the facility administrators locked down the visitor logs. I drove through the heavy wrought iron gates of the Summerlin Assisted Living Center. The landscaping featured drought-resistant succulents and imported white gravel, perfectly raked to project an image of serene luxury. The facility charged $12,000 every single month. My father, Richard, constantly reminded our family about this specific financial burden. He claimed paying for her premium care was draining his personal accounts and stalling his real estate developments. The building looked like a high-end desert resort from the outside. Inside, it functioned as a gilded cage designed to warehouse the inconvenient elderly. I parked my sedan in the visitor lot and walked through the sliding glass doors. The lobby smelled of clinical lavender and hidden bleach. A uniformed security guard monitored a marble front desk. I signed the digital visitor log and walked past a grand piano nobody ever played. My heels clicked against the polished hardwood floors of the West Wing. This specific corridor housed residents requiring advanced memory care. The doors were thick and the nurses spoke in hushed, rehearsed tones. My stomach tightened with a familiar dull ache. I prepared my mind to face a hollow, fading version of the woman who raised me. The medical charts indicated severe cognitive decline. The facility's staff sent weekly updates documenting her supposed confusion and lethargy. I reached suite 412. I tapped my knuckles against the heavy oak door. I turned the brass handle and stepped inside, expecting a tragedy. The room was flooded with bright, natural sunlight. The television was turned off. My grandmother Beatrice did not sit in a wheelchair staring at a blank wall. She sat perfectly upright at a small glass dining table. She wore a tailored wool blazer over a crisp silk blouse. A pair of wire-framed reading glasses rested on the bridge of her nose. She held a fresh copy of the Wall Street Journal. Her eyes tracked the daily market fluctuations printed in the finance section. She folded the newspaper neatly and looked directly at me. Her gaze was sharper than shattered glass. She did not offer a confused greeting. She bypassed small talk entirely. Beatrice asked me point blank if I had visited the Henderson Bank branch yet this morning. I stood frozen in the doorway. My forensic auditing background did not prepare me for this specific shock. I nodded slowly. I told her the branch manager locked us inside his office and revealed the $40 million holding account. A thin, calculated smile spread across her face. She instructed me to lock her suite door and take a seat. I sat across from her, trying to reconcile the bleak medical reports with the brilliant woman sitting in front of me. Beatrice poured 2 cups of black coffee from a silver carafe. She explained her methodology without a trace of hesitation. She spent the last 12 months executing a masterful theatrical performance. She faked every single symptom of dementia. She poured her prescribed cognitive medications down the bathroom sink. She purposely forgot the names of the nursing staff and feigned exhaustion during family visits. I asked her why she would subject herself to a locked memory care unit. She took a sip of her coffee and delivered a chilling truth. She said society renders older women invisible the moment their minds appear broken. People stop guarding their secrets. They speak freely around a ghost. Beatrice utilized her manufactured invisibility to conduct her own domestic espionage. Richard held weekly meetings with his corporate attorneys inside this very suite. He assumed his mother was lost in a fog of neurological decay. He openly discussed his catastrophic business failures right in front of her. He leveraged his commercial development firm far too highly during the pandemic housing rush. His luxury condominium projects near the Strip were hemorrhaging cash. High-interest private equity loans were coming due. He lacked the liquid capital to cover the balloon payments. His entire empire was teetering on the edge of insolvency. The conversation shifted to a highly specific asset. Decades ago, my grandfather purchased a 50-acre parcel of undeveloped desert scrubland in North Las Vegas. Everyone in the family considered the plot worthless. Beatrice knew better. That dusty patch of dirt sat directly adjacent to a newly zoned industrial sector. Richard needed a massive influx of cash to satisfy his predatory lenders. He formulated a plan to steal the title to that specific property. He intended to pledge her 50 acres as collateral to save his own sinking ship. He orchestrated her dementia diagnosis to build a legal foundation for a hostile financial takeover. He needed the courts to deem her incapacitated so he could seize her portfolio. I pulled the folded check from my blazer pocket and laid it on the glass table. I asked her about the Thanksgiving dinner. Beatrice leaned forward, resting her forearms on the glass. She explained that the holiday meal was not a family gathering. It was a psychological audit. She needed an executor capable of managing a brutal corporate war. She needed someone who respected capital and understood restraint. She handed out 3 identical checks to test the hubris of the man at the table. Richard failed instantly. His ego could not tolerate receiving a handout from a woman he deemed inferior. He ripped up $3 million just to maintain dominance over the dining room. He destroyed a legitimate fortune because his vanity blinded his basic common sense. Lance mimicked the patriarch, hoping to earn a shred of his father's approval. They both burned their own rescue boats. I was the only person in the room who treated the asset with respect. I secured the paper and verified the data. I passed the audit. Beatrice reached under her chair and pulled out a heavy leather briefcase. The brass locks were scuffed from years of use. She placed it on the table and spun the combination dials. The latches popped open with a heavy metallic snap. Inside the velvet-lined interior rested a stack of pristine legal documents. I saw original property deeds, corporate seals, and certified boundary surveys. These papers represented the impenetrable armor protecting her desert empire. She pushed the briefcase toward me. She told me I was no longer just a casino auditor hunting missing chips. I was now the sole guardian of her legacy. She instructed me to take the deeds and prepare for the incoming retaliation. Richard would stop at nothing once he realized the blind trust was actively blocking his access to the North Las Vegas land. The financial hostage situation was about to escalate into open warfare. I closed the briefcase and secured the brass latches. The weight of the leather handle grounded me in the reality of the moment. I looked at my grandmother one last time. The fragile patient narrative was dead. A wartime general sat in her place. I unlocked the suite door and walked back down the sterile hallway. I navigated the polished floors and exited the sliding glass doors into the blinding Nevada sun. The dry desert heat radiated off the asphalt parking lot. I walked toward my sensible sedan carrying the keys to a $40 million fortress. I pressed the unlock button on my key fob. Before I could reach the driver's side door, the sound of a roaring engine shattered the quiet afternoon. A sleek black luxury sport utility vehicle accelerated across the lot and swerved sharply. The heavy vehicle slammed on its brakes directly behind my sedan. It blocked my exit path entirely. The dark-tinted windows rolled down, revealing a threat I did not expect to face this early in the afternoon. I carried the heavy leather briefcase across the scorching asphalt of the visitor parking lot. The Nevada midday sun beat down on my shoulders, radiating an oppressive dry heat. Shimmering waves distorted the horizon, blurring the physical line between the manicured facility landscaping and the barren desert beyond. I reached into my purse to retrieve my car keys. The faint metallic jingle was immediately drowned out by the sudden roar of a high-performance engine. A sleek black luxury sport utility vehicle swerved violently around a row of parked sedans. The driver slammed on the brakes, causing the heavy tires to screech loudly against the hot pavement. The dark vehicle angled aggressively and stopped inches from my rear bumper. My exit path was entirely blocked. The driver's side door flew open before the engine even cut off. Lance stepped out into the blinding sunlight. He did not look like the arrogant heir who smirked and ripped a multi-million-dollar check over a bowl of turkey gravy yesterday afternoon. The curated visual aesthetic he spent years perfecting was entirely gone. His tailored desert sage suit was heavily wrinkled and stained with sweat. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, revealing a profound lack of sleep. Pure panic radiated from his erratic, frantic movements. He paced toward me, closing the physical distance between us with heavy, desperate footsteps. He ran a trembling hand through his messy hair and started talking fast. The words spilled out of his mouth in a chaotic, panicked stream. He explained that he stopped at a local suburban gas station 10 minutes ago to fill the tank of his oversized vehicle. He inserted his premium metal credit card into the pump terminal. He expected the standard authorization chime. Instead, the digital screen flashed a bright red declined message. He assumed the bank flagged the transaction for routine fraud protection. He dialed the dedicated customer service number, expecting a quick automated reset from a polite representative. The agent on the phone did not unlock his card. The representative informed him that his primary checking and corporate credit accounts were locked. The bank froze his assets due to severe overdrafts and hostile creditor actions triggered overnight. His available liquid balance was zero. Lance stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. He frequented high-limit rooms at the major strip casinos and expected VIP treatment everywhere he went. The profound humiliation of standing at a mundane public gas pump with a useless piece of metal shattered his curated reality. The financial denial triggered a devastating morning epiphany. He told me he spent the entire night reviewing his failing business ledgers. He realized our father Richard was hiding massive commercial debts tied directly to their joint ventures. When the bank representative confirmed his insolvency, the memory of the Thanksgiving dinner rushed back to him. He realized the crisp white envelope Beatrice slid across the mahogany table was not a dementia-driven joke. He realized he literally tore up his only financial lifeline. He pointed a shaking finger at the inner pocket of my blazer. He demanded to know if I kept my check intact. I maintained my neutral posture. I looked at my older brother and confirmed I secured the document. Lance exhaled a sharp breath of relief. His panic briefly morphed back into his default state of toxic entitlement. He took a step closer and demanded I transfer $1.5 million to his routing number the second the funds cleared. He claimed we were family and business partners. He tried to invoke the same twisted loyalty Richard utilized to control our dynamic for decades. He insisted I owed him half of my inheritance to save his sinking reputation and prevent his luxury cars from being repossessed. I tightened my grip on the handle of the leather briefcase. I looked at the golden sun and delivered a cold dose of reality. I told him I would not give him a single dime. I explained the complex mechanics of the blind trust and the federal oversight attached to the routing sequence. I informed him that cashing the check would trigger an immediate review by the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network and alert the probate courts. I explained that the money was locked behind an impenetrable legal wall. He did not care about the banking regulations or the federal statutes. He only cared about his immediate lack of liquidity. My refusal triggered a visceral meltdown. Lance lost his temper entirely. He kicked the front tire of his own luxury vehicle, leaving a scuff mark on the expensive rim. He yelled about his looming corporate obligations and his luxury lifestyle collapsing around him. He acted like a toddler deprived of a toy, rather than a grown man managing a real estate portfolio. Watching his public breakdown cemented everything my grandmother warned me about. Shielding a man from the consequences of his actions only produces a fragile liability. Lance was incapable of surviving a genuine crisis. The passenger door of the sport utility vehicle pushed open. Jasmine stepped onto the blacktop. The intense contrast between husband and wife was jarring. Jasmine wore a sharp charcoal blazer and carried herself with lethal composure. She is a highly certified commercial appraiser. Over the last decade, she built a formidable reputation evaluating massive industrial warehouses and luxury hotel acquisitions across the Las Vegas Valley. She understands capitalization rates and predatory lending structures better than anyone in our orbit. When the post-pandemic real estate boom hit Nevada, developers like Richard artificially inflated their assets to secure massive private equity loans. Jasmine saw the underlying rot hidden inside the paperwork. She knew their loan-to-value ratios were entirely fabricated. She recognized the impending market crash long before the first collection notice arrived in the mail. She married Lance 2 years ago, expecting an equal partnership. She quickly analyzed his corporate spreadsheets and realized she married into a financial sinkhole. Her presence at the Thanksgiving dinner was a silent intelligence-gathering mission. Jasmine did not yell at her husband to calm down. She did not coddle his bruised ego or offer him empty marital reassurances. She walked past the front of the vehicle, heading directly toward me. Her face was an unreadable mask of professional detachment. Lance continued his frantic pacing, ignoring her approach. Jasmine stepped right into my personal space. She did not slow her stride. She brushed past me, bumping her shoulder aggressively against my collarbone. The physical contact felt jarring. To a casual observer walking across the parking lot, the collision looked like an accidental stumble born of frustration and anger. But I felt the deliberate, calculated movement of her left hand. Her fingers slid swiftly under the lapel of my jacket. She pressed a tightly folded piece of heavy paper deep into my blazer pocket. The entire covert exchange lasted less than 2 seconds. Jasmine stopped walking and turned around to face me. She locked her dark eyes onto mine. She did not part her lips to speak. She communicated a profound, urgent warning through a silent, knowing gaze. She turned her attention back to Lance. She grabbed him firmly by the elbow. She ordered him to stop embarrassing himself in a public parking lot and get back into the driver's seat. Her voice carried the undeniable authority of a woman who had just finalized her own exit strategy. Lance blinked in confusion, but obeyed her command. The fight drained out of him. He slumped back into the vehicle. Jasmine climbed into the passenger side and slammed the heavy door shut. The dark engine roared back to life. Lance threw the transmission into reverse and sped out of the visitor lot, leaving a trail of gray exhaust smoke hanging in the dry air. I stood alone in the oppressive midday heat. My heart hammered a steady rhythm against my ribs. I held my grandmother's secure legacy in my right hand. I reached my left hand into my blazer pocket. My fingertips brushed against the sharp edges of the paper Jasmine secretly delivered. I needed to know exactly what kind of financial nightmare my brother and my father were hiding. The tires of Lance's luxury vehicles screeched onto the main arterial road leading away from the Summerlin Assisted Living facility. I watched the dark sport utility vehicle disappear into the midday heat haze. The sudden silence of the parking lot felt incredibly loud. I did not waste time staring at the empty blacktop. I walked quickly to my sensible sedan and unlocked the doors with my key fob. I placed the heavy leather briefcase on the passenger seat and climbed behind the steering wheel. I hit the automatic lock button, instantly sealing myself inside the air-conditioned cabin. I did not start the engine. I needed to understand the warning my sister-in-law just delivered. My fingers traced the edge of the folded paper tucked deep inside my blazer pocket. Jasmine was not a woman prone to dramatic theatrical gestures. She was a brilliant commercial appraiser who operated purely on data and verifiable risk assessments. If she risked a physical altercation in a public parking lot to pass me a document, the information contained within was catastrophic. I pulled the paper out and slowly unfolded the thick stationery. The corporate letterhead printed across the top of the page belonged to a highly aggressive private equity firm based in Chicago. The document was not a routine bank statement or a gentle reminder about a missed payment. The bold red font screamed across the center of the page. It was a formal notice of commercial default and intent to foreclose. I scanned the dense legal text using the exact same analytical focus I applied to casino ledgers during a forensic audit. The names listed as the primary borrowers were Richard and Lance. They established a joint limited liability company 3 years ago during the peak of the post-pandemic housing rush. They secured a massive line of credit to finance a sprawling luxury condominium project located just a few blocks off the Las Vegas Strip. They promised investors panoramic views, rooftop infinity pools, and unprecedented returns on capital. The reality of their business acumen was painted in bleak, numerical terms on the paper resting in my lap. The condominium project was a spectacular failure. Supply chain issues, skyrocketing material costs, and profound mismanagement drained their construction budget before the foundation was even poured. The project stalled, leaving a massive concrete crater in the middle of a prime commercial zoning district. The private equity firm did not care about the volatile housing market or my father's bruised ego. They cared about the $5 million in principal and accrued interest currently past due. The numbers on the page were staggering, but they did not explain why Jasmine risked slipping me the document. I continued reading past the loan balance and the standard threatening legal jargon. I reached the third paragraph, detailing the specific financial instruments used to secure the high-interest debt. To borrow $5 million from a predatory lender, a developer must pledge an asset of equal or greater value. Private equity firms do not issue unsecured loans based on a firm handshake and a round of golf. My blood ran cold. The asset listed as the primary collateral for the $5 million loan was not the half-built condominium project. It was not my father's sprawling McDonald Highlands estate or Lance's luxury vehicles. The collateral securing the debt was a specific 50-acre parcel of undeveloped desert scrubland located in North Las Vegas. I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. That specific plot of land belonged exclusively to my grandmother Beatrice. My grandfather purchased that dusty acreage decades ago, and the deed remained firmly in her name. I reached over and unlatched the brass locks on the heavy leather briefcase resting on the passenger seat. The metallic snaps echoed sharply inside the quiet car. I opened the lid and pulled out the stack of pristine legal documents Beatrice handed me just 20 minutes earlier. I sifted through the files until I found the original property deed for the 50-acre parcel. I laid the authentic county record directly next to the private equity default notice. I compared the legal descriptions and the parcel identification numbers. They matched perfectly. The scope of the crime unfolding before my eyes was breathtaking. Richard did not just borrow money to fund a bad real estate venture. He actively pledged an asset he did not legally own to secure a $5 million corporate loan. He used his own mother's land as a financial shield to protect his personal wealth. My mind raced through the complex mechanics of commercial real estate law. A private equity firm and their associated title companies require rigorous documentation before accepting a piece of land as collateral. They require notarized signatures and verified proof of ownership. Richard could not simply walk into a Chicago boardroom and verbally promise them 50 acres of Nevada desert. He needed a legal mechanism to bypass the strict ownership requirements and the meticulous oversight of the title officers. There was only one way my father could successfully execute that specific level of corporate fraud. He needed a legal document granting him absolute control over Beatrice's financial portfolio. He needed a mechanism that superseded her direct involvement in the transaction. I remembered the conversation I just had with my lucid grandmother inside her locked suite. She told me Richard orchestrated her dementia diagnosis to build a foundation for a hostile financial takeover. He weaponized her supposed cognitive decline to convince the outside world she was incapable of managing her own affairs. I stared at the default notice, realizing exactly what Richard had done. He must have filed a fraudulent power of attorney with the county recorder's office. He likely hired a corrupt local notary to forge Beatrice's signature on the legal documents, granting him total executive authority over her estate. He presented that fake power of attorney to the private equity firm, claiming his mother was mentally incapacitated and he was acting as her designated legal guardian. The predatory lenders accepted the forged documents and approved the $5 million loan, securing the debt against the 50-acre parcel. The timeline laid out in the default notice presented a terrifying reality. Richard and Lance were entirely out of time and out of liquid cash. The Chicago firm issued a final ultimatum printed at the very bottom of the page. If the $5 million balance was not satisfied in full by the end of December, the equity firm would initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings. They would legally seize the North Las Vegas property and auction it off to recover their losses. Richard was not just trying to hack a banking portal to steal $40 million. He was actively running out the clock on a $5 million debt that would leave Beatrice completely stripped of her most valuable asset. If I did not intervene, the land my grandfather purchased would belong to a ruthless private equity firm in less than 60 days. I folded the default notice and placed it back inside my blazer pocket. I closed the heavy leather briefcase securing the authentic deeds. I shifted the car into drive. I needed to access the Clark County Public Records database immediately to find the forged power of attorney and stop the foreclosure before the deadline hit zero. I did not return to the casino floor on Monday morning. I sat at my kitchen table and dialed the private extension of my auditing director. I did not offer a detailed explanation regarding my absence or mention the looming commercial foreclosure threatening my family. I simply requested an immediate personal leave, citing a severe domestic emergency. My director approved the request without hesitation. He knew my work ethic, and he understood I never abandoned an active financial investigation without a valid reason. I was not abandoning an investigation today. I was simply shifting my jurisdiction from the baccarat tables of the Las Vegas Strip to the bureaucratic machinery of the local government. I drove downtown to the Clark County Regional Justice Center. The towering glass and steel building serves as the legal epicenter of southern Nevada. The architecture is designed to project rigid municipal authority. I passed through the metal detectors and walked past the crowded criminal arraignment courtrooms. I had no interest in the petty theft or standard domestic disputes occupying the ground floor. I navigated the heavy foot traffic and took the elevator up to the County Recorder's Division. This department houses the foundational truth of every single real estate transaction executed within the county lines. It is a vast repository of property deeds, commercial liens, and corporate borrowing agreements. I pulled a numbered paper ticket from a red dispenser and waited for my turn. The waiting area smelled faintly of stale coffee and industrial toner ink. Exhausted paralegals and frustrated homeowners sat in rows of hard plastic chairs. I did not feel frustrated. I felt the cold, calculating focus that takes over my mind right before I dismantle a fraudulent casino ledger. I listened to the automated voice calling out numbers over the crackling overhead speaker system. My number echoed through the room. I walked up to a vacant computer terminal assigned for public records research. I sat down and accessed the digital property database. I typed my grandmother Beatrice's full legal name into the primary search bar. I cross-referenced her name with the specific assessor parcel number attached to the 50-acre North Las Vegas desert plot. The system churned for several seconds before populating a dense chronological list of recorded documents. I bypassed the original purchase deed from 3 decades ago. I scrolled directly to the filings registered within the last 12 months. I needed to find the specific administrative footprint my father left behind when he secured his predatory private equity loan. The search results revealed a massive commercial deed of trust recorded just 6 months prior. The filing listed the Chicago-based private equity firm as the primary lender and Richard as the borrowing entity. I clicked on the hyperlink to download the attached exhibit files. The screen rendered a high-resolution scan of the original loan application. I scanned the pages, looking for the specific legal mechanism Richard utilized to pledge land he did not personally own. I found the underlying document buried on page 14 of the commercial packet. The header displayed a bold black title reading, "Durable Power of Attorney for Financial Management." I leaned closer to the monitor and scrutinized the paperwork. The effective date stamped at the top of the page was late October of the previous year. My stomach tightened. That date was not a random coincidence. That was the exact same week Richard orchestrated the aggressive medical intervention to force Beatrice into the locked memory care unit in Summerlin. He utilized her sudden physical isolation to fabricate this exact legal instrument. He controlled her communication with the outside world while he quietly stripped away her financial autonomy on paper. I scrolled down to the bottom of the document to examine the signature line. The ink rendering displayed a clumsy, erratic imitation of my grandmother's name. It lacked the sharp, fluid cursive strokes I saw on the authentic $3 million checks she handed out at Thanksgiving. The forged signature looked intentionally shaky, designed to mimic the failing motor skills of a woman suffering from advanced cognitive decline. Richard manipulated the visual aesthetic of the forgery to support his false medical narrative. Below the forged signature sat a circular blue ink stamp. The seal belonged to a licensed Nevada notary public. A legal power of attorney requires a certified third-party witness to verify the identity and the willing consent of the person signing away their rights. I read the name printed inside the blue circular border. A bitter, cynical smile crossed my face. The architecture of my father's crime was incredibly lazy. The notary was not an independent third-party contractor. I recognized the name immediately. The stamp belonged to an in-house closing agent employed directly by Richard's commercial real estate development firm. He did not even bother hiring an outside professional to sanitize his criminal activity. He used his own corporate payroll staff to execute the fraudulent verification. The conflict of interest was a blazing neon sign. This document was not a tragic administrative misunderstanding. It was a coordinated corporate conspiracy executed to defraud a vulnerable elder. I printed the forged power of attorney and the attached commercial lien. I gathered the paperwork and left the records department. I walked up 2 flights of stairs navigating the quiet hallways of the probate court division. Nevada law provides specific emergency legal mechanisms to halt the financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. I approached the filing desk and requested the forms for an ex parte emergency injunction. This specific legal maneuver allows a judge to temporarily suspend a fiduciary relationship without notifying the accused party beforehand, provided there is overwhelming evidence of immediate financial harm. I stood at a tall wooden counter and filled out the sworn affidavit. I used the precise, unfeeling language of a forensic investigator. I detailed the timeline of the forced assisted living relocation. I cited the suspicious notary seal and the conflicting signature styles. I attached the printed forgery retrieved from the county database. Then I opened my heavy leather briefcase. I pulled out the authentic blind trust documents Beatrice entrusted to my care. I placed the genuine estate paperwork directly on top of the fraudulent commercial lien. The physical contrast between her ironclad legal fortress and his clumsy corporate theft was undeniable. I walked back to the filing window and submitted the thick packet to the clerk sitting behind a thick pane of bulletproof glass. The clerk did not ask emotional questions or offer sympathetic platitudes. She reviewed the statutory requirements and verified the filing fees. She reviewed the glaring discrepancy between the authentic trust dates and the forged power of attorney. She picked up a heavy mechanical date stamp. The metal device crashed down onto my sworn affidavit. The loud, sharp thud echoed against the glass partition. That single, percussive sound represented the immediate evaporation of my father's financial authority. The temporary restraining order was instantly active upon filing. Richard could no longer legally sign a single contract, authorize a bank transfer, or negotiate a loan modification on behalf of Beatrice. The Chicago private equity firm could not legally seize the North Las Vegas land at the end of December because their underlying collateral agreement was now tied to a suspended fiduciary. The hostile land transfer was officially blocked. I had severed his access to the fortune, using the very bureaucratic system he tried to exploit. I gathered my stamped copies and walked out of the Regional Justice Center. The brutal midday sun hit my face as I stepped onto the concrete plaza. I felt a brief, intense surge of adrenaline. I dismantled his primary weapon and secured the Desert Empire. But white-collar predators do not simply surrender when a legal door slams shut in their face. They adapt. They search for a softer, more vulnerable target to exploit. They leverage the assets they still control to force their opponents into submission. I walked toward my parked sedan, reviewing the remaining variables in my head. My cell phone started ringing before I even reached my car door. I pulled the device from my blazer pocket. The caller identification screen did not display a Las Vegas casino number or a familiar friend. The digital text displayed the main reception desk of the Summerlin Assisted Living Facility. The surge of victory vanished, instantly replaced by a cold, creeping dread. I unlocked my car and answered the call, knowing my father had already launched his devastating counterattack. The oppressive afternoon heat radiated off the concrete plaza of the Clark County Regional Justice Center. I stood beside my parked sedan, gripping my smartphone. The digital caller identification screen displaying the Summerlin Assisted Living Facility felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I had just successfully filed an emergency legal injunction blocking my father Richard from stealing a $40 million piece of desert real estate. The ink on the court clerk's stamp was barely dry. I expected a period of quiet consolidation while the legal system processed the paperwork and froze his corporate access. I did not expect a counterattack this rapidly. I answered the call with a sense of rising dread. The voice on the other end of the line did not belong to a routine desk clerk calling to confirm a weekend visitation schedule. The speaker identified herself as the primary facility director. She did not use the soothing, rehearsed tone reserved for affluent family members paying $12,000 a month for premium elder care. Her voice was tight and edged with genuine panic. She bypassed pleasantries and launched directly into a severe administrative crisis unfolding inside her building. The director explained that the automated billing system triggered a catastrophic alert exactly 30 minutes ago. She manages the financial accounts for dozens of high-net-worth residents requiring specialized memory care. Her software is designed to automatically deduct the massive monthly fees from designated family checking accounts on the first day of every billing cycle. She stated that Richard logged into the primary patient portal using his secure credentials shortly after noon. He did not simply miss a payment or request a brief extension due to a banking error. My father executed a scorched earth financial maneuver. The director detailed the digital footprint he left behind in the facility records. He aggressively canceled the auto draft authorization. He manually deleted the routing numbers tied to the specific checking account used to fund Beatrice's ongoing medical care. But he did not stop at severing the future payment pipeline. He initiated an immediate external wire transfer, draining the entire existing balance of that dedicated account down to zero. He moved every single dollar meant for her prescriptions, her specialized diet, and her 24-hour nursing supervision into an unknown location. I stood frozen in the parking lot, processing the sheer brutality of his actions. Richard was not a clumsy amateur criminal relying on simple forgery anymore. He was a cornered predator, willing to sacrifice his own mother to maintain his luxurious lifestyle. When the probate court processed my emergency injunction and electronically notified his legal team of the asset freeze, he realized his primary avenue of theft was entirely blocked. He could no longer use the North Las Vegas land as collateral to save his failing condominium projects. Instead of retreating or seeking a negotiated settlement, he pivoted to a much darker strategy. He recognized that while the court froze his ability to sell the real estate, he still maintained administrative control over the mundane daily checking accounts previously established under his fraudulent power of attorney. He weaponized the only leverage he had left. He transformed Beatrice's health care from a necessary expense into a tactical hostage situation. The facility director continued speaking, outlining the devastating consequences of his actions. The corporate policies governing luxury assisted living centers in Nevada are completely unforgiving. These institutions do not operate as charitable organizations or public hospitals. They are highly lucrative businesses that strictly enforce their payment schedules, regardless of internal family disputes. She explained that the current monthly balance of $12,000 was now officially delinquent. The facility provided premium care based entirely on the assumption of reliable, continuous funding. She informed me that if the outstanding balance was not settled in full by the end of the business day on Friday, the corporate board would initiate immediate eviction protocols. The word eviction hung in the hot desert air like a physical threat. I asked her to clarify the exact process. I assumed they would simply transfer Beatrice to a lower-tier wing of the building or temporarily suspend some of the non-essential luxury amenities until the legal dispute was resolved. The director shattered that naive assumption. She explained that a resident requiring locked memory care cannot simply be discharged onto the street. When a family defaults on the massive monthly payments, the facility is legally obligated to transfer the patient to a state-run ward. These public institutions are chronically underfunded, severely understaffed, and entirely bleak. They are the exact opposite of the serene, lavender-scented environment Beatrice currently occupied. They are places where the elderly are warehoused rather than cared for. If Richard successfully forced her eviction, Beatrice would be stripped of her private suite, her dedicated nursing staff, and her carefully managed diet. She would be thrown into a chaotic public system alongside hundreds of other neglected patients. The sudden, traumatic relocation would be physically and psychologically devastating for an 80-year-old woman, even one as brilliant and lucid as my grandmother. The trap Richard constructed was masterful in its cruelty. He knew I possessed the legal documentation to block his real estate theft. He knew the authentic blind trust I held in my heavy leather briefcase superseded his clumsy, forged paperwork. But he also knew I possessed a fundamental human weakness he lacked entirely. I actually cared about the physical safety and the daily comfort of the woman who raised me. He was using her impending eviction as a brutal form of extortion. He was essentially demanding a ransom for her continued premium care. The message was perfectly clear, even though he did not speak the words directly to me. If I wanted to prevent my grandmother from being dumped into a bleak, state-run facility, I had to immediately drop the probate injunction and surrender my status as the executor of the trust. I had to let him steal the $40 million desert empire to ensure she kept her private room in Summerlin. I gripped the phone tightly, staring blankly at the concrete columns of the Justice Center. I asked the director to give me a few hours to arrange an alternative payment method. I promised her the $12,000 balance would be satisfied before the Friday deadline. She expressed her sympathy for the complex family situation, but reiterated the rigid corporate policy. She needed certified funds, or Beatrice would be formally processed for state transfer. I ended the call and climbed into the driver's seat of my sedan. The air conditioning blasted cold air against my face, but I felt entirely numb. I sat in the parking lot, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I spent my entire adult life auditing corrupt casino floors to ensure every single chip was accounted for. I was trained to expose complex financial crimes and bring wealthy executives to justice. But all of my forensic skills felt entirely useless against a man willing to use his own mother's medical care as a weapon. I had successfully severed his access to the fortune, but he countered by severing her access to survival. I realized I was trapped in a terrifying financial hostage situation. I could not simply rely on the slow-turning wheels of the Nevada probate court to resolve this crisis. The legal system operates in months and years. Beatrice only had until Friday. I needed immediate liquid capital to pay the facility and secure her safety before I could continue the war for the North Las Vegas land. I looked down at the inner pocket of my black blazer. The crisp folded paper resting against my chest suddenly felt incredibly heavy. My grandmother handed me a personal check written out for exactly $3 million at the Thanksgiving dinner table. The funds were entirely real and backed by a massive corporate holding account. I had the exact financial instrument required to pay for decades of premium medical care sitting right in my pocket. I started the engine and merged into the heavy downtown traffic, heading straight back to the Henderson Bank branch. The bright afternoon sun glared against the windshield as I navigated my sedan back onto the 215 Beltway. I merged into the heavy traffic, heading straight back toward the quiet suburban Henderson Bank branch. The air conditioning blasted inside the cabin, failing to cool the sheer panic rising in my chest. The $12,000 eviction deadline hung over my head like a physical threat. I drove with aggressive precision, bypassing slower vehicles and ignoring the scenic mountain views blurring past my windows. My father, Richard, had just weaponized my grandmother's health care to force me to surrender the $40 million blind trust. He thought I was trapped because I lacked the immediate liquid capital to cover her premium medical care. He fundamentally underestimated the crisp white envelope Beatrice handed me during Thanksgiving dinner. He assumed the personal bank check was a pathetic product of dementia. He tore his own check in half out of pure arrogance. I kept mine folded safely inside my blazer pocket. The physical piece of paper represented $3 million in verified funds. I did not need the entire amount. I just needed a fraction of that money to satisfy the assisted living facility balance and secure her luxury suite before Friday. I pulled into the bank parking lot and walked briskly through the double glass doors. The lobby was significantly busier than my early morning visit. A line of local business owners waited for the tellers. I bypassed the queue entirely. I walked straight up to the heavy wooden door of the branch manager's office and knocked firmly. The manager, who previously revealed the massive corporate holding account, opened the door immediately. He recognized my face and quickly ushered me inside, locking the deadbolt behind us. The sterile smell of corporate cleaning supplies filled the small office. The manager sat behind his polished mahogany desk. He looked even paler than he had this morning. The stress of managing a multi-million-dollar account actively targeted by a hostile family member was clearly taking a toll on him. I did not waste time offering pleasantries. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out the folded check. I smoothed the crease and placed the document flat on his desk. I explained the brutal hostage situation unfolding at the Summerlin Memory Care Unit. I detailed how Richard canceled the automated billing and drained the specific checking account used for her medical expenses. I laid out the strict corporate eviction protocol and the Friday deadline. I told the manager I needed to cash the $3 million check immediately. I intended to deposit a large portion of the funds into a new secure account and wire $12,000 directly to the facility director to halt the state ward transfer. The manager did not reach for his computer mouse or begin typing the authorization codes. He stared at the check resting on his desk and let out a heavy, defeated sigh. He leaned back in his leather chair and delivered a harsh dose of financial reality. He explained that my plan was logically sound, but legally suicidal. He told me that cashing that specific check right now would trigger an immediate, catastrophic chain reaction. He pointed to the legal routing sequence printed along the bottom edge of the paper. He reminded me that the check was tied directly to a highly regulated, irrevocable blind trust. These specific legal instruments are designed to protect vast wealth from external creditors and probate courts, but they are heavily monitored by the federal government. He stated that initiating a $3 million transfer from a blind trust is not a simple banking transaction. The manager lowered his voice to a whisper. He revealed that because Richard had spent the last year aggressively establishing a medical narrative of severe cognitive decline, any massive transfer of assets would automatically flag the Internal Revenue Service. He explained that a $3 million check written by a woman officially diagnosed with advanced dementia is legally classified as an anomalous wealth event. The transaction would instantly trigger a comprehensive federal audit. The chilling reality of my father's strategy settled over me. Richard was not just relying on the eviction threat to force my compliance. He had engineered a secondary trap, hiding within the tax code itself. The manager informed me that Richard retained a highly aggressive tax attorney in downtown Las Vegas. This attorney specialized in high net worth estate litigation and hostile corporate takeovers. He was actively monitoring the trust activity through specialized financial software. The manager laid out the exact sequence of events that would unfold if he processed my check today. The moment the $3 million cleared the clearinghouse, the tax attorney would receive an automated alert. He would immediately notify Richard. My father would then drive directly to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. He would file a formal criminal complaint accusing me of severe elder financial exploitation. Richard would present the cashed check as manufactured proof of my guilt. He would use his fabricated medical records and the forged power of attorney to convince the detectives that I manipulated a vulnerable dementia patient into handing over a fortune. He would claim he was merely trying to protect his mother from a predatory daughter. The narrative would be perfectly constructed to frame me as the villain. The resulting federal investigation would be devastating. The manager explained that the Internal Revenue Service and the local authorities would immediately freeze every single asset associated with my name and the blind trust. The $3 million would be locked in a secure government holding account pending a lengthy criminal trial. My personal checking accounts, my casino auditing salary, and the funds meant for the Summerlin facility would all be seized as evidence. I would be unable to wire the $12,000 to the director. The eviction protocol would proceed exactly as Richard planned. Beatrice would be stripped of her private suite and thrown into a bleak, state-run ward while I fought felony exploitation charges in a federal courtroom. I was staring at a perfectly designed double-edged sword. I held the financial cure in my hand, but the act of administering it would instantly kill the patient. I picked the $3 million check up off the mahogany desk. My fingers trembled slightly. The illusion of leverage vanished. I realized the profound depth of my father's cruelty. He constructed a financial hostage situation where, utilizing my only rescue asset, would automatically trigger my own destruction. I folded the paper and slid it slowly back into my blazer pocket. I thanked the manager for his honesty and walked out of the locked office. I stepped back into the blistering afternoon sun feeling entirely cornered. I could not use the trust funds to save her. I could not rely on the slow process of the probate court injunction. I had less than 96 hours to generate $12,000 in liquid cash to satisfy the corporate billing department. I unlocked my car and sat in the quiet cabin, staring blankly at the dashboard. My phone vibrated against my leg. A calendar notification illuminated the screen, displaying an invitation for a private dinner at an exclusive strip steakhouse tomorrow evening. The hosts listed on the digital invite were Richard and Brenda. The extortion was officially moving into the negotiation phase. The calendar notification illuminated the dark interior of my sedan. A digital invitation requested my presence at an exclusive steakhouse located inside a flagship casino on the Las Vegas Strip. The hosts listed on the screen were Richard and Brenda. My parents were not inviting me to share a warm family meal. They were summoning me to a hostage negotiation. I drove back to my apartment and changed out of my casual clothes. I selected a structured black blazer and tailored trousers. This was a corporate boardroom battle disguised as a social gathering. I reached into my desk drawer and retrieved a small digital audio recorder. The state of Nevada operates under a one-party consent law regarding private communications. As long as one individual involved in the conversation agrees to the recording, the audio remains legally admissible in a court of law. I turned the device on, slipped it into the lining of my leather purse, and zipped the compartment shut. I was gathering evidence for a state task force. I navigated the heavy evening traffic along Las Vegas Boulevard. The neon lights of the massive resorts reflected off my windshield, creating a synthetic, glowing landscape. The entire city runs on the premise of calculated risk and manufactured illusions. My father built his entire real estate career mirroring that exact same philosophy. I handed my keys to the valet and walked through the sprawling casino floor. The rhythmic ringing of slot machines and the cheering crowds provided a chaotic soundtrack. The steakhouse sat tucked away behind heavy velvet curtains, offering a quiet sanctuary for high-net-worth gamblers and corporate executives. The air inside smelled of charred oak and expensive dry-aged beef. The hostess guided me to a private curved booth in the back corner of the dimly lit dining room. Richard and Brenda were already seated. They projected the curated aesthetic of undisturbed generational wealth. Brenda wore a tailored terracotta silk blouse and a heavy diamond tennis necklace. Those stones were purchased using funds quietly siphoned from my grandmother's accounts, long before the probate injunction froze their access. Her face remained rigid and unmoving, reflecting years of expensive Summerlin cosmetic procedures. She did not offer a maternal greeting. She simply sipped her sparkling water and observed the room. Richard wore a custom-fitted navy suit. He looked relaxed and unbothered. A casual observer walking past our booth would never guess the man swirling his wine was 60 days away from defaulting on a $5 million private equity loan. He operated with the practiced ease of a developer who spent decades convincing skeptical investors to fund empty desert lots. I slid into the leather booth across from them. I placed my purse carefully on the seat beside me, ensuring the hidden microphone faced the center of the table. Richard immediately summoned the sommelier with a dismissive wave of his hand. He treated the service staff like invisible machinery. He ordered a $200 bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon without bothering to glance at the price list. He waited for the server to pour the dark red liquid into his crystal glass. He raised his drink and offered a hollow toast to family unity and overcoming minor misunderstandings. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. I let the silence stretch across the table. I wanted him to work for his extortion. My father leaned forward, resting his forearms on the white linen tablecloth. He adopted the tone of a benevolent patriarch managing a trivial administrative dispute. He claimed the canceled medical payments at the assisted living facility were simply a cash flow anomaly. He blamed the missing $12,000 on aggressive pandemic-era supply chain disruptions impacting his commercial development firm. He painted himself as a victim of a volatile housing market, fighting a noble battle to keep his company afloat. He spun a narrative designed to make me feel like a confused daughter who simply did not understand the complexities of high finance. He smoothly transitioned the conversation toward the ransom demand. Richard acknowledged the impending Friday eviction deadline hanging over Beatrice. He promised to log into the patient portal tonight and wire the past due balance to the facility director immediately. He guaranteed my grandmother would remain safely inside her luxury memory care suite, receiving her specialized diet and constant nursing supervision. He offered this financial rescue as a generous paternal favor, rather than correcting his own malicious sabotage. Richard reached into his jacket pocket and placed a sleek black leather portfolio on the table. He flipped the cover open, revealing a stack of dense legal paperwork. He explained the explicit terms of his proposed truce. He required me to sign a formal relinquishment agreement. The document would legally surrender my status as the primary executor of the blind trust. He also demanded I hand over the physical $3 million check Beatrice gave me during the Thanksgiving dinner. He framed this hostile takeover as a necessary strategy to protect the family estate. He claimed aggressive state taxes and lengthy probate delays would erode my grandmother's legacy if I remained in control. He insisted his corporate attorneys were better equipped to handle the complex tax liabilities associated with her portfolio. He lied with a steady heartbeat and unblinking eyes. I looked at the legal waiver resting next to a silver breadbasket. I knew exactly what would happen the second my ink hit that signature line. Richard would drive straight to the county recorder's office and dissolve the blind trust. He would reinstate his fraudulent power of attorney. He would finalize the private equity collateral utilizing the 50-acre North Las Vegas parcel to save his failing condominium project. He would leave Beatrice penniless. He would eventually dump her into a state-run ward anyway, once his temporary truce expired and the desert land was sold. He also knew I could not simply cash the check to save her, because his tax attorney was waiting to trigger a federal audit and frame me for elder exploitation. He thought he held every single advantage. The waiter arrived carrying 3 plates of rare, dry-aged ribeye. The rich scent of seared meat and roasted garlic filled the booth. I picked up my heavy steak knife. The serrated edge caught the dim, ambient lighting. I sliced a small piece of beef and chewed the food slowly. I maintained steady eye contact with the man sitting across from me. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse him of wire fraud or mention the digital recorder capturing his extortion scheme. I needed him to believe his trap was working perfectly. I needed him arrogant and complacent for the next phase of my own strategy. I set my knife down on the porcelain plate. I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin. I told Richard his proposal was a substantial legal request requiring careful consideration. I informed him I would not sign a binding waiver or surrender a multi-million-dollar financial instrument over a casual dinner. I looked past his confident posture and focused on the panicked greed hiding in his eyes. I coldly stated I needed 48 hours to have my own legal counsel review the document. Richard tightened his grip on his wine glass. The muscles in his jaw clenched tight. A flash of genuine anger crossed his face before he forced a rigid, synthetic smile. He agreed to the delay, but reminded me the facility deadline was rapidly approaching. He warned me not to let my stubborn nature jeopardize my grandmother's safety. I slid the black portfolio across the table and placed it into my bag next to the spinning audio recorder. I stood up from the booth, leaving my expensive meal mostly unfinished. I walked out of the steakhouse, leaving them to pay for the $200 wine using borrowed time. The desert air outside the casino felt cool and sharp. The valet brought my sedan to the curb. I tipped the driver and climbed behind the steering wheel. My phone buzzed in my pocket before I could start the engine. A text message from Jasmine illuminated the digital screen. She proposed a morning meeting at a local coffee shop, far away from the affluent suburban neighborhoods. The silent alliance we forged in the Summerlin parking lot was ready to execute the next phase of the war. The harsh morning light reflected off the cracked asphalt of a dated strip mall parking lot located deep within the older sections of Las Vegas. I parked my sedan a considerable distance away from the affluent neighborhoods of Summerlin and McDonald Highlands. I needed a location devoid of the country club elite and corporate developers my father associated with. I walked through the automatic sliding doors of a massive, aging casino that catered primarily to local residents and budget tourists. The air inside the building smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap breakfast buffets. I bypassed the registration desk and headed straight for the 24-hour coffee shop situated near the rear exit. The rhythmic ringing of slot machines, the electronic chimes of video poker, and the constant dull roar of casino patrons provided a chaotic soundtrack. The ambient noise level was incredibly loud. It was the perfect environment for a covert intelligence exchange. No one could eavesdrop on a conversation buried beneath the chaotic symphony of a gambling floor. I spotted Jasmine sitting in a booth facing the entrance. She wore a sharp, tailored charcoal blazer and oversized dark sunglasses, despite the dim lighting inside the restaurant. She did not look like the panicked wife I saw standing next to a declined credit card in the assisted living facility driveway. She radiated the cold, calculated energy of a commercial appraiser preparing to dismantle a fraudulent real estate portfolio. I slid into the vinyl booth across from her. A tired waitress wearing a stained uniform dropped 2 ceramic mugs of black coffee onto the Formica table. She did not offer a menu or ask if we needed anything else before disappearing back into the kitchen. Jasmine did not reach for her mug. She kept her hands folded neatly on top of a thick manila folder resting on the table. She removed her sunglasses and looked directly at me. Her dark eyes held no trace of sorrow regarding her crumbling marriage. She possessed a brilliant analytical mind, and she was operating with ruthless precision. She bypassed any emotional pleasantries and laid out the stark, numerical reality of her domestic life. She explained that she spent the last 30 days executing a covert forensic audit of my brother Lance's personal and corporate financial accounts. She utilized her specialized knowledge of Nevada commercial real estate to trace his complex web of debt. When she married him 2 years ago during the peak of the housing boom, he projected the image of a highly successful developer partnering with our father. She quickly realized his entire aesthetic was funded by predatory private equity loans and massive credit lines. Jasmine revealed she was not simply a passive victim watching her husband's empire collapse. She was actively preparing her own legal and financial escape route. She meticulously gathered the banking records, the forged loan applications, and the defaulted commercial contracts. She understood the exact capitalization rates and the fraudulent loan-to-value ratios Richard and Lance used to secure their $5 million debt. But her investigation uncovered a piece of data so explosive it completely altered the trajectory of my father's extortion scheme. She opened the manila folder and slid a dense stack of printed emails and zoning maps across the table. I scanned the documents, struggling to process the implications of the information. Jasmine lowered her voice, leaning across the table so I could hear her over the ringing slot machines. She explained that the 50-acre parcel of undeveloped desert scrubland belonging to my grandmother Beatrice was no longer just a barren patch of dirt sitting in North Las Vegas. The entire municipal landscape surrounding that specific acreage shifted dramatically over the last 6 months. A major global technology corporation had quietly selected that exact industrial zoning sector to build a massive new infrastructure project. They were preparing to construct a $1 billion data center to support their expanding cloud computing network. The corporation required vast amounts of cheap desert land, proximity to major power grids, and the favorable tax structures offered by the state of Nevada. Beatrice's 50 acres sat directly in the center of their proposed development footprint. Jasmine pointed a manicured finger at a specific spreadsheet detailing comparable land sales in the immediate vicinity. The mathematical reality hit me like a physical blow. The value of that dusty desert plot did not just increase slightly due to standard market inflation. The impending arrival of the technology giant triggered a seismic shift in commercial valuation. The land skyrocketed from a modest $2 million appraisal to a staggering $40 million corporate buyout target almost overnight. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with terrifying clarity. Richard and Lance were not just desperate developers trying to stave off a $5 million private equity foreclosure. They were not simply trying to use their own mother's land as a temporary financial shield to save their failing luxury condominium projects near the Strip. Their desperation masked a much larger, much more lucrative criminal conspiracy. They discovered the confidential technology corporation plans weeks ago through their corrupt network of local municipal contacts. They realized Beatrice possessed an asset capable of instantly erasing all of their debts and establishing a massive new generational fortune. They needed to secure the title to that land before the global corporation publicly announced the data center project and officially executed the $40 million purchase agreement. My father orchestrated the entire dementia narrative, the forced relocation to the locked memory care unit, and the forged power of attorney specifically to steal that impending windfall. He needed the probate courts to deem her incapacitated so he could quietly sell the acreage to the technology firm under his own executive authority. When I filed the emergency injunction and froze his legal access, I did not just block a $5 million collateral transfer. I inadvertently derailed a $40 million corporate heist. The extortion at the steakhouse last night was not a negotiation for survival. Richard was perfectly willing to let Beatrice rot in a bleak state-run ward because he believed the payoff would justify the cruelty. He offered to reinstate her $12,000 medical payments because he needed me to sign away my executor status immediately. He needed my signature to dissolve the blind trust and clear the title before the technology company finalized their site selection. He was offering me a fraction of a penny while attempting to steal an entire empire. Jasmine closed the manila folder and slid it back across the table. She looked at me with a fierce, unyielding intensity. She told me she had already secured her own independent commercial appraisal assets and hired a ruthless divorce attorney. She was prepared to walk away from Lance, leaving him entirely exposed to the private equity lenders and the federal authorities. But she needed to ensure the men in my family did not escape the consequences of their fraud. She needed to know if I was ready to execute a counterstrike, capable of dismantling their operation permanently. I picked up my ceramic mug and took a slow sip of the bitter black coffee. The ringing of the casino floor faded into the background. The terror of the eviction deadline and the threat of the IRS audit vanished entirely. I was no longer fighting a defensive battle to protect my grandmother from a nursing home eviction. I was preparing to launch an offensive strike against a $40 million corporate theft. I set my mug down and looked at the brilliant woman sitting across from me. I told Jasmine I needed her to attend a very specific legal signing appointment on Friday morning. I needed her to play the role of the oblivious wife one last time while we built a trap my father could never escape. I left the chaotic ringing of the casino floor and drove straight back to my quiet apartment. The air conditioning hummed softly, masking the ambient noise of the Las Vegas afternoon. I laid the thick manila folder Jasmine handed me on my kitchen island. I stared at the dense spreadsheets, the confidential zoning maps, and the email chains outlining the $40 million data center acquisition. My father, Richard, and my brother, Lance, were not just drowning in predatory private equity loans. They were actively orchestrating a massive corporate heist targeting my grandmother, Beatrice. The 50-acre North Las Vegas parcel was the single key to their financial salvation and the foundation of their criminal conspiracy. I did not have time to process the emotional gravity of their betrayal. The eviction deadline imposed by the luxury Summerlin assisted living facility was rapidly approaching. If the $12,000 medical balance remained unpaid by Friday afternoon, the corporate board would formally transfer Beatrice to a bleak state-run ward. Richard weaponized her health care to force my compliance, knowing I could not cash the $3 million Thanksgiving check without triggering a catastrophic federal tax audit. He believed he successfully trapped me in a hostage situation where surrendering my status as the executor of the blind trust was the only viable rescue option. He fundamentally misunderstood the tactical mindset of a forensic casino auditor. My entire career is built on identifying the hidden vulnerabilities in complex systems. I spend 60 hours a week tracking phantom ledgers and exposing corrupt financial architects. I do not surrender to extortion. I analyze the leverage points and build a superior trap. I pulled my smartphone from my blazer pocket and dialed the number printed on the legal waiver Richard presented at the steakhouse. The contact information belonged to his highly aggressive tax attorney, located in a sleek downtown law firm. A polished receptionist transferred my call to the senior partner. The man on the other end of the line answered with the smooth, confident tone of a litigator accustomed to intimidating his opponents. I did not raise my voice or express any frustration regarding the hostage tactics. I kept my tone entirely flat and professional. I informed the attorney I reviewed the documents and decided to accept my father's proposed truce. I stated I was prepared to sign the formal relinquishment agreement, surrendering my legal authority over the irrevocable blind trust. I also confirmed I would bring the physical $3 million personal check to the meeting and hand it over to Richard. The attorney let out a brief, audible exhale of satisfaction. He likely assumed his aggressive posturing and the looming eviction deadline successfully broke my resolve. He began listing the available appointment times at his private firm for Thursday afternoon. I cut him off mid-sentence. I told him I would not step foot inside his office or sign a single document on his territory. I dictated the specific terms of my surrender. I demanded the execution of the waiver take place inside a neutral, commercial title company located near the Las Vegas Strip. I insisted on Friday morning, precisely at 10 o'clock. I framed my demand as a necessary precaution, stating I required a certified, independent escrow officer to witness the transfer of the physical check and notarize the legal signatures. I wanted a neutral third party present to guarantee Richard fulfilled his promise to reinstate the medical payments immediately after I signed the paperwork. The attorney hesitated for a fraction of a second before agreeing to my conditions. He recognized my request as the typical paranoia of a defeated adversary seeking a shred of procedural safety. He did not care about the location as long as he secured my signature on the waiver before the technology corporation finalized the $40 million land acquisition. He confirmed the appointment and ended the call to relay the victory to my father. Richard undoubtedly celebrated the news, assuming his extortion plot worked perfectly. He believed the neutral title company provided a safe, sterile environment to finalize his theft. He had absolutely no idea the location was a carefully selected piece of theater designed to facilitate his own destruction. My father did not know I spent a previous evening initiating a completely different legal protocol. Before I met Jasmine at the casino coffee shop, I sat at my kitchen table and reviewed the evidence I quietly gathered over the last 48 hours. I possessed the fraudulent power of attorney pulled directly from the Clark County Records Department, bearing the forged signature and the corrupt notary stamp. I secured the digital facility logs, proving Richard maliciously canceled the $12,000 medical payments. I held the audio recording from the steakhouse, capturing his explicit ransom demands and his admission of financial sabotage. I did not take this mounting evidence to the local municipal police department. Standard patrol officers lack the specialized training required to investigate complex international wire fraud and high-level corporate theft. I navigated my web browser to the official portal for the state of Nevada. I located the specific contact information for the Attorney General and accessed the division dedicated entirely to prosecuting white-collar crimes. I dialed the direct line for the Elder Financial Abuse Task Force. The investigator who answered my call did not dismiss my claims as a routine family dispute over an inheritance. He recognized the sophisticated mechanics of the crime immediately. He understood the predatory nature of the private equity collateral, the fraudulent dementia narrative, and the tactical weaponization of the assisted living facility. I spent hours coordinating a secure digital transfer. I uploaded the forged documents, the facility ledgers, and the audio file to their encrypted server. I also forwarded the explosive corporate intelligence Jasmine provided regarding the impending billion-dollar data center project. The investigator reviewed the massive discrepancy between the authentic blind trust and the forged power of attorney. He listened to Richard casually extort his own daughter over a $200 bottle of Cabernet. The task force did not hesitate to act. The state of Nevada views the financial exploitation of vulnerable adults as a severe felony, especially when the theft involves multi-million-dollar real estate assets and interstate commerce. The investigator assured me they possessed enough probable cause to secure immediate arrest warrants for both Richard and Lance. They also initiated the legal process to formally freeze all associated corporate accounts, preventing the transfer of any funds to the Cayman Islands. I did not want the arrest to occur in the chaotic environment of a McDonald Highlands mansion or a busy casino floor. I wanted to control the physical space and the timing of the confrontation. I coordinated the specific logistics with the lead investigator, outlining the Friday morning appointment at the neutral title company. I provided them with the exact address, the suite number, and the layout of the conference room. The trap was fully constructed and the snare was set. Richard and Lance were preparing to walk into a sterile corporate office, expecting to execute a $40 million heist and leave my grandmother in a state-run ward. They believed they successfully manipulated the legal system to serve their own greed. They were about to discover the devastating consequences of underestimating the daughter they spent decades trying to control. The stage was perfectly set for Friday morning. Friday morning arrived with a blinding intensity. The Nevada desert sun beat down on the concrete pavement of the commercial plaza. Heat waves distorted the view of the surrounding palm trees, blurring the physical lines of the city architecture. I parked my sedan in the visitor lot and turned off the engine. Today was the absolute deadline. The luxury assisted living facility in Summerlin expected a $12,000 wire transfer by the end of business hours. If that money did not arrive, my grandmother Beatrice would be formally evicted and transferred to a bleak state-run ward. My father Richard orchestrated that medical hostage situation to force my compliance. He expected me to walk into the title company office this morning and surrender an empire to save her life. I stepped out of my car. I did not carry the $3 million personal check in my blazer pocket. I carried a hidden audio recorder and the absolute certainty of his impending destruction. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the commercial title agency. The transition from the scorching desert heat to the freezing artificial air conditioning was an immediate physical shock. The lobby projected a sterile corporate neutrality. Abstract paintings hung on pale beige walls. A receptionist directed me toward a large glass-walled conference room situated at the end of a long, quiet corridor. I walked slowly. I needed to control my heart rate. I needed to maintain the cold, analytical detachment I utilize when dismantling a fraudulent casino ledger. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside the room. My family was already waiting. They arranged themselves around a massive rectangular glass table. Richard sat at the designated head of the board, projecting the supreme confidence of a victorious developer. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and a silk tie. He smiled when I entered the room. His expression was incredibly smug. He truly believed his extortion plot worked flawlessly. He assumed the threat of an Internal Revenue Service audit and the looming nursing home eviction successfully broke my resolve. He looked at me not as a daughter, but as a conquered business rival, submitting to a hostile corporate takeover. My mother, Brenda, sat directly to his right. She checked the time on a heavy diamond watch. The stones caught the harsh fluorescent lighting illuminating the freezing room. Brenda abandoned her maternal instincts decades ago, trading them for social status and expensive jewelry funded by illicit capital. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not inquire about the profound stress they inflicted upon me over the last week. She simply tapped her manicured fingernails against the glass table, eager to finalize the paperwork and secure her stolen wealth. She wanted to quickly return to her affluent suburban bubble and pretend this ugly family transaction never happened. My older brother Lance sat on the opposite side of the table. He provided a stark contrast to my father's relaxed arrogance. Lance was physically crumbling under the weight of his own financial incompetence. His right leg bounced nervously underneath the table, creating a faint rhythmic vibration. He stared blankly at the wall. The $5 million private equity loan default was tearing his nervous system apart. He desperately needed my signature to release the North Las Vegas land and save his failing luxury condominium project. He looked like a desperate gambler waiting for a final card to drop. Jasmine sat quietly in the far corner of the conference room. She positioned herself away from the primary table, distancing herself from the men orchestrating the fraud. She wore a simple black dress and kept her gaze directed downward. She held her smartphone in her lap, typing brief, rapid messages. Lance assumed she was distracting herself with mundane social matters. He had no idea she was actively communicating with a ruthless divorce attorney. She was finalizing the legal dissolution of their marriage while simultaneously securing her own independent commercial appraisal assets. Jasmine and I did not exchange a verbal greeting. We shared a single, brief glance. Her dark eyes conveyed a silent, unbreakable solidarity. She was perfectly executing her role in our coffee shop alliance. An escrow officer entered the room carrying a thick manila folder. She was an independent third-party contractor hired to witness the signatures and process the legal transfer. She did not know she was facilitating a $40 million corporate theft. She offered a polite, rehearsed smile and distributed copies of the documents to everyone at the table. She placed the primary legal waiver directly in front of me. She set a standard black ballpoint pen resting perfectly parallel to the signature line. The document header displayed the formal title of the Executor Relinquishment Agreement. This was the exact paperwork Richard presented at the steakhouse a few nights ago. The text dictated the absolute surrender of my legal authority over my grandmother's irrevocable blind trust. Signing the paper would grant my father total access to the 50-acre desert parcel. It would allow him to finalize his fraudulent power of attorney and execute the sale to the Global Technology Corporation. It would also trigger the fraudulent bankruptcy protocol he planned to use to erase his local debts and leave Jasmine entirely penniless. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on the glass surface. He adopted a low, soothing voice. He told me I was making the right decision for the family legacy. He promised to initiate the medical wire transfer to the Summerlin facility the exact second I handed the signed document to the escrow officer. He lied with the practiced ease of a man who never faced a single consequence for his actions. He expected me to pick up the pen and surrender without a fight. I reached out and picked up the black plastic pen. The room went entirely silent. Lance stopped bouncing his leg. Brenda stopped tapping her fingernails. Richard held his breath, waiting for his financial salvation. I did not move my hand toward the signature line. I pulled the document closer and pretended to read the dense legal paragraphs printed in the fine print. I utilized the silence to control the pacing of the room. I shifted my gaze slightly upward. A digital clock hung on the beige wall directly behind my father. The red numbers displayed 9:58 in the morning. I needed to stall for exactly 120 seconds. The Nevada Attorney General investigator I spoke with the previous night required a highly specific window of time to position his tactical team outside the building. I read the paperwork slowly, deliberately dragging my eyes across every single sentence. The digital clock shifted to 9:59. Richard shifted his weight in his leather chair. The facade of the benevolent patriarch began to slip. He cleared his throat loudly. He instructed me to stop delaying the inevitable and finalize the transaction. He reminded me the medical facility deadline was only a few hours away. He tried to re-inject the terror of the hostage situation back into my mind. I ignored his voice. I focused entirely on the glowing red numbers on the wall. I thought about my grandmother Beatrice, sitting in her locked suite faking dementia to expose the predators at her dinner table. I thought about the $3 million check she used as a psychological test. She trusted me to manage a brutal corporate war. I was not going to fail her audit. I watched the seconds tick away. The digital clock finally hit 10 exactly. The red numbers locked into place. The designated execution time arrived. I lowered the document and placed it back onto the center of the glass table. I kept the black pen in my hand for a brief moment before letting it drop. The plastic instrument hit the glass surface with a sharp, definitive click. The sound echoed loudly in the freezing room. I did not make a single mark on the paper. The signature line remained completely blank. Richard stared at the empty space at the bottom of the page, his brow furrowed in confusion. He looked up at me, demanding to know what I was doing. I did not break eye contact. I kept my voice entirely flat and devoid of emotion. I told him he was out of time. I looked directly at my father and informed him the North Las Vegas land deal was officially dead. I told him the Technology Corporation was no longer interested in purchasing stolen property. My father stared at the blank signature line resting on the glass table. He opened his mouth to scream a demand. He never got the opportunity. The heavy frosted glass doors of the conference room swung inward with a violent, undeniable force. The metal handles slammed hard against the interior drywall. The sudden, explosive sound shattered the freezing, sterile atmosphere of the title company. The independent escrow officer gasped loudly and dropped her clipboard, scattering blank municipal forms across the carpet. A tall man wearing a tailored charcoal suit stepped across the threshold. He did not look like a local real estate attorney or a suburban bank manager. He projected the polished, ruthless energy of a senior acquisitions executive. He represented the global technology corporation slated to build the billion-dollar data center in North Las Vegas. He was not alone. 2 state investigators from the Nevada Attorney General Elder Financial Abuse Task Force followed closely behind him. They wore heavy, dark tactical vests over their standard dress shirts. Gold badges hung from thick metal chains around their necks. The physical presence of armed law enforcement inside a neutral corporate negotiation room suffocated the remaining oxygen. Richard jumped out of his leather chair. The polished veneer of the wealthy McDonald Highlands developer vanished in a fraction of a second. The blood drained rapidly from his cheeks, leaving his skin the color of wet ash. He looked at the tactical investigators and then shifted his terrified gaze toward the technology executive. His brain struggled to process the devastating intersection of his corporate greed and the state justice system. Brenda dropped her designer handbag onto the floor. She clutched her heavy diamond tennis necklace, pulling the stones so tight the wire threatened to snap. Lance stopped bouncing his nervous leg. He gripped the edge of the glass table, bracing his body against the sudden collapse of his curated reality. The senior executive did not offer a polite corporate greeting. Global technology firms operate on rigorous compliance metrics and strict public relations protocols. They avoid clouded property titles and criminal investigations like a terminal disease. He looked at my father with profound corporate disgust. He stated his legal department received a highly disturbing intelligence dossier late last night. The secure file contained documented proof of forged signatures, corrupt notary stamps, and a fraudulent commercial lien attached to the target acreage. He informed Richard the corporation was formally withdrawing their $40 million purchase offer. They refused to conduct business with a developer attempting to sell stolen property. The executive placed a formal letter of termination on the edge of the table and stepped back, letting the state investigators take the floor. Richard panicked. He raised his hands in a frantic defensive gesture. He tried to spin a rapid, desperate lie, claiming the entire situation was a massive administrative misunderstanding. He pointed a shaking finger at me. He told the investigators I was an unstable daughter trying to ruin a legitimate family trust. He insisted he held a valid, durable power of attorney, granting him total executive control over his mother's financial assets. He desperately clung to the forgery he created while Beatrice was locked inside the Summerlin Memory Care Unit. He believed his corrupt paperwork could still shield him from a federal prison cell. I did not argue with a desperate man. I reached down and lifted my heavy leather briefcase onto the glass table. The brass latches snapped open with 2 sharp metallic clicks. I reached inside the velvet-lined interior. I did not pull out the $3 million Thanksgiving check. I bypassed the original blind trust documents entirely. I withdrew a thick stack of freshly minted legal paperwork bearing the official raised seal of the Clark County Recorder. I dropped the heavy files directly onto the center of the glass table, right next to his unsigned extortion waiver. I looked at my father and explained the brutal reality of his situation. I told him his forged power of attorney was entirely worthless. It did not matter if his corrupt corporate notary stamped the paper 100 times. A power of attorney only grants legal authority over assets the principal actually owns. I instructed him to read the top page of the new document resting in front of him. The header displayed a formal warranty deed, executed and legally recorded just 3 days ago. Beatrice did not wait for the slow-turning wheels of the probate courts to process my emergency injunction. She knew the legal system moved too slowly to protect her from a son willing to weaponize her medical care. My grandmother bypassed the bureaucratic red tape entirely. She utilized her lucid mind and her ironclad legal standing to dissolve her own holding company. She transferred the sole ownership of the 50-acre North Las Vegas parcel directly into my name. I was no longer just the executor of a blind trust. I was the undisputed legal owner of a $40 million desert empire. The sheer brilliance of Beatrice's strategy materialized before my eyes. The Thanksgiving dinner was never just a psychological audit to test our hubris. The crisp white envelopes were a masterfully engineered distraction. She handed out $3 million personal checks, knowing Richard would hyper-focus on the liquid cash. She knew his greed would blind him to the larger structural moves she was making behind the scenes. While my father obsessed over freezing bank accounts and intercepting medical payments, Beatrice quietly contacted her own private legal counsel. She dismantled the foundation of his theft while he was busy arguing over the wallpaper. Richard stared at the warranty deed. His jaw slacked. The implications of the document crushed the remaining fight out of his posture. He pledged 50 acres of North Las Vegas scrubland to a predatory private equity firm in Chicago to secure a $5 million high-interest loan. He used a forged document to bypass the title officers and finalize the collateral. Because the land now belonged exclusively to me, his commercial lien was legally void. He secured $5 million using a ghost asset. That specific action transitions a desperate business maneuver into a severe felony. He committed multiple counts of wire fraud and bank fraud in a single transaction. Lance let out a sharp, guttural gasp. The $5 million private equity loan was held under a joint limited liability company. He was equally responsible for the fraudulent collateral. He realized the Chicago lenders would not simply write off a massive loss. The moment the private equity firm received official notification regarding the voided deed, they would initiate hostile recovery protocols. They would bypass the standard foreclosure process and file immediate civil lawsuits to seize every single domestic account tied to his name. His luxury condominium project near the Las Vegas Strip was instantly dead. His tailored suits, his premium credit cards, and his curated socialite lifestyle evaporated in the freezing air of the conference room. Jasmine remained seated in the far corner of the room. She did not gasp when the tactical officers breached the doors. She did not show a shred of surprise when the technology executive canceled the multi-million-dollar acquisition. She watched the destruction of the men in my family with cold, analytical satisfaction. She was a commercial appraiser who spent her career calculating risk and identifying toxic assets. She identified the toxic rot inside her own marriage and executed a flawless exit strategy. She tucked her smartphone into her dark wool coat. The covert text messages to her divorce attorney were complete. The financial snare we built together inside that noisy casino coffee shop snapped shut with lethal precision. The lead state investigator stepped forward. He did not offer my father a polite invitation to discuss the matter downtown. The time for negotiations and fake steakhouse truces was officially over. The state of Nevada was taking control of the narrative. The investigator instructed Richard and Lance to step away from the glass table and keep their hands visible. The corporate ambush was complete, and the financial ruin of my family was about to begin. The sterile atmosphere inside the title company conference room shattered completely. The senior technology executive did not offer a polite corporate farewell after withdrawing the $40 million purchase offer. He simply turned around and walked out, leaving the heavy glass doors swinging behind him. His departure signaled the evaporation of the massive windfall my father Richard desperately counted on to erase his debts. The two state investigators from the Elder Financial Abuse Task Force remained positioned near the exit, blocking any potential escape route. They did not shout or draw their weapons. The quiet, authoritative presence of armed law enforcement executing a white-collar raid is far more terrifying than a chaotic physical confrontation. Richard stood frozen, staring at the authentic warranty deed resting on the glass table. The document proved my grandmother Beatrice legally transferred the North Las Vegas parcel directly into my name 3 days ago. The forged power of attorney he utilized to secure his predatory $5 million loan was entirely void. The implications of that specific legal failure began to manifest with brutal speed. Modern financial systems operate on automated intelligence, not human empathy. The moment I filed the authentic deed with the Clark County Recorder, an electronic alert automatically pinged the compliance department of the Chicago-based private equity firm. The corporate lenders realized their $5 million high-interest loan was secured by a ghost asset. They did not wait for a phone call or a requested explanation. They executed their contingency protocols instantly. The lead state investigator checked his smartphone and looked directly at my father. He informed Richard that the private equity firm had officially triggered hostile foreclosure proceedings against his luxury condominium project near the Las Vegas Strip. The lenders were currently filing emergency civil motions to seize the half-built concrete structure and liquidate the remaining construction materials to mitigate their losses. But the financial destruction did not stop at the commercial project site. Private equity firms do not simply repossess the primary collateral when they uncover massive loan fraud. They aggressively pursue the personal guarantors. The investigator stated that the Chicago lenders utilized the federal courts to initiate an immediate asset freeze. Every single domestic checking account, savings portfolio, and corporate credit line tied to Richard's real estate development firm was officially locked. They even targeted his personal wealth, freezing the accounts he shared with my mother, Brenda. The millions of dollars he spent decades accumulating utilizing predatory tactics and fabricated appraisals evaporated into a frozen legal purgatory. Lance let out a sharp, terrified gasp. He slumped back into his leather chair, realizing his name was also listed on the fraudulent loan documents. He partnered with Richard during the peak of the post-pandemic housing boom, artificially inflating their assets to secure the massive line of credit. The asset freeze applied directly to him. His tailored Desert Sage suits, his luxury vehicle leases, and his curated high-roller lifestyle were instantly defunded. He was a man who spent his entire adult life relying on his father's wealth to shield him from consequences. Now he was tethered directly to his father's sinking ship. Jasmine stood up from her chair in the far corner of the conference room. She did not look panicked or surprised by the sudden presence of law enforcement or the catastrophic financial collapse unfolding before her. She was a brilliant commercial appraiser. She analyzed capitalization rates and identified toxic debt structures for a living. She recognized the fatal flaws in Lance's business model months ago. When the post-pandemic market cooled and the private equity loan required a balloon payment, she knew the entire operation was going to implode. Her quiet observation at the Thanksgiving dinner and her silent alliance with me inside the casino coffee shop were not acts of impulsive revenge. They were components of a meticulously calculated exit strategy. She smoothed the wrinkles from her sharp charcoal blazer and walked calmly toward the center of the room. She did not offer Lance a comforting touch or a word of sympathetic reassurance. She stopped directly behind his chair and dropped a thick manila folder onto the glass table right next to my authentic warranty deed. The folder landed with a heavy, definitive thud. Lance looked at the paperwork with wide, terrified eyes. He asked her what she was doing. Jasmine did not raise her voice. She spoke with a cold, lethal precision that echoed clearly in the silent room. She informed him that the folder contained formal divorce proceedings filed in the Nevada family court system earlier this morning. She stated that she refused to allow her prominent professional reputation or her pristine credit score to be dragged through a federal bankruptcy court because he decided to commit real estate fraud. But the divorce papers were only the first layer of her counterstrike. Jasmine tapped a secondary document clipped to the front of the folder. She revealed it was a comprehensive forensic accounting report she personally compiled over the last 30 days. She tracked every single hidden account, every fabricated vendor invoice, and every illicit transfer Lance attempted to conceal during their 2-year marriage. She utilized her specialized appraisal access to trace the exact locations where he tried to stash his dwindling capital. She officially submitted the entire report to her ruthless divorce attorney, guaranteeing the court would strip him of any remaining marital assets during the settlement negotiations. Lance stared at his wife, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. He expected her to play the role of the loyal, supportive partner, absorbing the collateral damage of his crimes. He never anticipated she would weaponize her corporate intelligence to dismantle him. Jasmine looked down at him with an expression of profound disgust. She informed him she had already legally separated her own independent appraisal firm from his toxic holdings. She secured her own wealth, ensuring the private equity lenders could not touch a single dollar she earned. She turned her back on the broken man she married and walked toward the heavy glass doors without offering a final goodbye. Brenda watched her daughter-in-law exit the room. The reality of the situation finally breached the thick walls of her affluent suburban delusion. She gripped the edge of the glass table, her knuckles turning white. She spent decades cultivating the persona of a wealthy McDonald Highlands socialite. She hosted lavish charity galas wearing heavy diamond jewelry purchased with funds quietly siphoned from my grandmother's accounts. She turned a blind eye to her husband's predatory tactics as long as the luxury cars remained in the driveway and the country club memberships remained active. She looked at Richard desperately seeking a reassuring lie or a promised legal loophole. She found nothing but the pale, terrified face of a defeated criminal. The state investigators were not offering negotiations or accepting bribes. The private equity lenders were seizing the condominium project. The banks froze their entire domestic fortune. The $40 million North Las Vegas land deal was officially dead. The carefully constructed facade of generational wealth shattered, leaving behind a barren landscape of federal indictments and public humiliation. Brenda let out a ragged, breathless sob. She collapsed heavily into her leather chair, realizing her curated lifestyle was permanently destroyed. The designer clothes, the exclusive dinner reservations, and the arrogant Thanksgiving toasts were entirely gone. She was no longer a prominent figure in the Nevada elite. She was the wife of an exposed felon sitting in the freezing ruins of a massive corporate theft. The financial hostage situation was officially over, and the predators were finally facing the absolute boundaries of the justice system. The sudden financial destruction of my family materialized inside the sterile title company conference room with astonishing speed. The private equity lenders were actively foreclosing on their massive luxury condominium project. The domestic checking accounts were officially frozen by federal mandate. Jasmine confidently walked out of the room, holding her own independent commercial appraisal assets and a ruthless divorce petition. Brenda sat paralyzed in her chair, a weeping monument to her own shattered socialite persona. Lance stared at the manila folder containing the forensic accounting report outlining his imminent bankruptcy. My father, Richard, stood entirely silent at the head of the glass table, the color drained completely from his face. The two state investigators from the Nevada Attorney General Elder Financial Abuse Task Force did not linger. They stepped forward and took control of the physical space. In affluent corporate settings, high-net-worth individuals expect polite discretion and quiet negotiations. Law enforcement typically affords prominent real estate developers a degree of privacy, allowing them to surrender at a predetermined time with their defense attorneys present. The investigators did not offer Richard that specific courtesy. The severity of the crimes he orchestrated demanded an immediate public display of authority. The lead investigator unhooked a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical vest. The sharp metallic clink cut through the freezing air conditioning humming in the background. He approached my father and ordered him to turn around and place his hands behind his back. Richard hesitated, attempting to muster a final shred of his dominant patriarch persona. He opened his mouth to argue, referencing his prominent position within the McDonald Highlands community and his golf club memberships. The investigator did not engage in debate. He forcefully grasped Richard's arms and secured his wrists in the metal restraints. The click of the locking mechanism finalized the collapse of an empire. The investigator recited the Miranda rights in a flat, rehearsed tone. The words echoed clearly across the glass table. He formally charged Richard with multiple counts of felony elder financial abuse, real estate forgery, and wire fraud. The senior executive from the Global Technology Corporation stood near the door, watching the arrest with cold, professional detachment. He witnessed the man who tried to sell him $40 million of stolen desert land, reduced to a criminal suspect facing a lengthy federal prison sentence. The secondary investigator pulled a sealed plastic evidence bag from a heavy-duty black nylon backpack. He placed the transparent bag directly onto the center of the conference table, right next to my authentic warranty deed and the fraudulent power of attorney. Inside the plastic rested the torn, shredded pieces of the $3 million personal check Richard destroyed during the Thanksgiving dinner. I stared at the crumpled paper stained with dried brown turkey gravy. The investigator explained the critical legal significance of that specific piece of trash. He stated that during the covert investigation following my emergency probate court injunction, the task force secured a warrant to search the refuse bins outside the Henderson estate. They recovered the torn check and logged it into the official chain of custody. The torn paper was not just a discarded prop from a theatrical family argument. It was a tangible, irrefutable piece of forensic evidence proving malicious intent. The state of Nevada views the destruction of a legitimate financial instrument belonging to a vulnerable adult as an explicit act of financial sabotage. Richard did not tear the check because he genuinely believed his mother suffered from advanced dementia. He tore it because his hubris demanded total control over her capital. The gravy-stained paper verified his arrogant disregard for Beatrice's financial autonomy, cementing the felony exploitation charges. The investigators escorted Richard out of the conference room. They did not take the private service elevator or exit through a discreet loading dock. They marched the prominent developer directly through the main lobby of the title company, past the staring receptionists and the waiting clients. They placed him in the back of a marked law enforcement vehicle, parked in the blinding desert sun. He looked through the tinted window, staring back at the commercial building containing the independent daughter he spent 30 years trying to manipulate and control. Exactly 365 days passed since I watched the patrol car drive away from that scorching suburban parking lot. I did not spend the subsequent 12 months tracking my family's daily miseries or gloating over their public humiliation. I directed every single ounce of my forensic auditing focus toward building a secure, unassailable foundation for the woman who trusted me with her legacy. I stood on the private balcony of my new penthouse apartment overlooking the sprawling Las Vegas Strip. The warm evening desert breeze carried the faint sounds of the chaotic city below. The neon lights of the massive resorts reflected off the glass railing, illuminating the dark sky. This space was entirely my own. I did not inherit the luxury property, and I did not rely on predatory private equity loans to secure the mortgage. I purchased the real estate using a pristine credit score and a substantial influx of legitimate corporate capital. I no longer worked grueling night shifts auditing baccarat tables and tracking missing casino chips. My grandmother Beatrice legally transitioned the North Las Vegas land ownership, recognizing my ability to manage a brutal financial war. When the state investigators arrested Richard, the technology corporation immediately re-engaged their acquisition protocols. They desperately needed the 50-acre parcel to build their billion-dollar data center. I did not simply sell them the land for $40 million. I utilized my deep understanding of commercial capitalization rates and negotiated a highly lucrative 99-year ground lease. The technology giant agreed to pay massive annual dividends while I retained the underlying property title. The initial signing bonus generated enough liquid cash to completely restructure my grandmother's life. Beatrice no longer lives inside the locked memory care unit of a luxury Summerlin facility. She resides in a sprawling private estate situated near Red Rock Canyon. I utilized the corporate lease dividends to employ a dedicated 24-hour medical staff, ensuring her absolute comfort and safety. She spends her afternoons reading the financial section of the newspaper, enjoying the serene desert landscape far away from the manipulative men who tried to steal her fortune. She dropped the fake dementia narrative entirely the moment the federal judge denied Richard's bail application. The justice system processed the crimes with remarkable speed, given the overwhelming forensic evidence provided by the state task force. Richard accepted a formal plea agreement to avoid a lengthy public trial that would further expose his corrupt business practices. He is currently serving a 10-year sentence in a state correctional facility located deep in the Nevada desert. He traded his tailored linen suits and expensive wine for standardized uniforms and rigid daily schedules. The man who spent his life projecting an illusion of untouchable power was finally facing the absolute boundaries of the law. Lance met a similarly devastating fate. When the Chicago private equity firm finalized the hostile foreclosure on the luxury condominium project, they seized every single domestic account tied to his name. The bankruptcy courts stripped him of his curated high-roller lifestyle. He currently lives in a cheap weekly motel located far away from the affluent neighborhoods he used to frequent. He relies entirely on a meager minimum wage job, unable to secure traditional employment due to his involvement in the wire fraud conspiracy. Jasmine executed her exit strategy with flawless precision. Her prominent commercial appraisal firm thrives in downtown Summerlin, completely untethered from the toxic financial ruin of her former husband. She utilized her specialized intelligence to protect her own assets and secure a lucrative divorce settlement. We forged a permanent chosen family out of the collateral damage, occasionally meeting for coffee in the noisy casinos where our silent alliance began. I walked back inside the air-conditioned penthouse and picked up my smartphone. I opened my secure banking application and reviewed the digital dashboard. The screen displayed a flawless, unencumbered balance generated by legitimate corporate dividends. The torn $3 million check was never simply about the money. The Thanksgiving dinner was a psychological audit designed to expose the predators hiding at the table. My grandmother handed me a ticking bomb and trusted me to dismantle the explosion. I swiped the notification away and set the device on the polished marble counter. The ultimate American payoff is not the acquisition of a $40 million desert empire. The true payoff is securing total, absolute peace, funded entirely by your own ironclad boundaries. Looking down at the neon glow of the Las Vegas Strip from the balcony of my penthouse, I do not feel a shred of remorse for the actions I took. I feel a profound, overwhelming sense of clarity. The journey from watching my father tear a $3 million check over a bowl of Thanksgiving gravy to managing a massive corporate data center lease taught me that survival requires absolute precision. It requires ruthlessness when dealing with financial predators who hide behind the mask of family loyalty. I walked away from that freezing title company conference room with 5 undeniable truths etched permanently into my mind. First, arrogance is the most expensive vulnerability a person can possess. My father Richard and my brother Lance lost a $40 million empire because their egos refused to respect a woman they deemed inferior. Hubris blinded them to the brilliant legal trap my grandmother Beatrice set right in front of their faces. Never underestimate quiet observation. Second, financial independence is your only genuine armor against extortion. If you rely on someone else to fund your lifestyle, you grant them the power to dictate your reality. Build your own foundation and understand the mechanics of your own wealth. When my father weaponized medical care to force my surrender, my auditing background gave me the tools to dismantle his entire operation. Third, always verify the paperwork. A crisp, tailored suit and a booming laugh do not equate to actual liquidity. The illusion of wealth is frequently funded by predatory loans and forged signatures. The most devastating financial crimes often originate from the people sitting directly across from you at the dinner table. Fourth, secure your hard-earned assets with ironclad legal boundaries. Grandfather Thomas and grandmother Beatrice knew a polite handshake meant absolutely nothing to a seasoned grifter. They protected their generational legacy by utilizing irrevocable trusts and covertly testing our character. If you have wealth, protect it with aggressive legal structures because financial desperation makes monsters out of ordinary people. Fifth, and finally, biology does not dictate loyalty or demand your silence. My true family is not sitting in a state correctional facility or a cheap weekly motel. My real family consists of Beatrice, who trusted me with her empire, and Jasmine, the brilliant sister I gained in the crossfire. We actively chose each other when the biological ties completely rotted away. Before I step back inside and enjoy the quiet peace of my new life, I want to officially welcome you to Maya Tells Stories. Sharing this incredibly dark chapter was not easy, but exposing the truth is the only way to dismantle the toxic shame surrounding elder financial abuse and family fraud. I know Lance is currently plotting his next manipulative move from his motel room, and Richard's federal appeals process is rapidly approaching. If you want me to make part 2 detailing the chaotic fallout of their state criminal appeals, remember to subscribe so you do not miss it. Tell me in the comments which of the 5 lessons resonated with your own life experience. Thank you for listening, and remember to always protect your peace.